Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Supporting Student Wellbeing Insights from Global Experts webinar. My name is Jamie Lee, and I'm the Education Design Specialist here at HundrED, and I will be your host for today. So to start off, we want to know who is joining us for the webinar. Feel free to introduce yourself in the chat and let us know where you are listening in from and what you do. So a few housekeeping items. This webinar will be recorded, so don't worry if you miss any part of it. The recording will be published on our event page a few days after the event. We will also be putting all links and resources in the chat, and you can feel free to use the chat to chat with other participants. If you have any questions for the panelists or HundrED team members, we will also have time for Q&A at the end of the session. So we ask that you please put your questions there so that in the Q&A section of Zoom, so that it's easier to see them, and to reserve using the chat for talking to other participants. Also, this webinar offers automated captions in English and translated captions. So if you would like to activate them, you can go to the toolbar at the bottom of your screen, click Show Captions, and then click the arrow beside that to see caption settings. You can toggle to activate translation and then change your caption language to the language that you prefer. All right, so before we start the panel discussions, I would like to introduce Dr. Crystal Green, who is the Research Director at HundrED, to share about what we do at HundrED and why we do Spotlight projects. Then we'll have Dr. Jennifer Merriman, the Director of Research and Design at International Baccalaureate Organization, who will explain how this Spotlight project fits into the broader framework of the Wellbeing in Schools project. All right, over to you, Crystal.
Thank you, Jamie. So I'd like to share a little bit about who we are at HundrED and what we do. HundrED is a mission-driven organization based in Finland, and we work globally to identify and amplify and support the implementation of education innovations that have shown the capacity for both impact and scale. So we started as part of the celebration of Finland's 100 years of national independence. And during the centenary celebrations, we identified 100 innovations in Finnish education, which is where we got our name, HundrED. And now HundrED recognizes 100 of the most inspiring innovations from all over the world every year in our global collections. There are currently over 4,000 innovations in our database, of which over 600 have been amplified by HundrED. And we work through our vibrant community of innovators, innovation reviewers, and HundrED ambassadors in over 110 countries. So that's a little bit about us. Now a bit about our innovation research. In order to delve deeper into innovation and education, we also conduct spotlight projects with partners like IBO to highlight specific themes in education. And this particular spotlight that we're doing on well-being in schools aims to help us better understand what kinds of innovative solutions and practices teachers and schools and districts and community organizations are using to improve well-being in schools, especially for students. So we are looking in the spotlight for innovations from all over the world, working in all kinds of K-12 schools. And in our review of the innovations, we'll consider those that support school climate and ethos, family and community involvement, participatory involvement, and pupil and teacher voice. And we'll also be interested in those that are incorporating targeted interventions. So we would love to see the work that you are doing to support well-being, and I will pass it back to you, Jamie.
Thank you, Crystal, for that great introduction. All right, so next we have Dr. Jennifer Merriman, the Director of Research and Design at the International Baccalaureate Organization, who will explain how the Spotlight project fits into the broader framework of the Wellbeing in Schools project. Welcome, Jennifer.
Great, thank you so much, and thank you everyone for joining us today. The IB aims to provide transformational education models in which we support not just rigorous academic learning, but also holistic student development. So in line with this approach, the IB places a significant emphasis on student and teacher well-being, and we focus on subjective well-being, how the students and teachers themselves are feeling. Today, we are here to focus on student well-being, and our approach is informed by the rigorous research conducted by the Oxford Wellbeing Research Center to ensure that our strategies and interventions are evidence-based and effective. Our definition, as you see on the screen here, is as follows. Students are well in school when they're satisfied with their school lives, have positive experiences in and feelings about school, and what they do in school gives them a sense of purpose and meaning. Next slide, please. In the report, Oxford developed a framework shown here that identifies the drivers or determinants of student well-being. And what we learned is that not all widespread well-being practices and resources are grounded in scientific evidence. And thus, a goal of ours with this work was to generate more evidence on what works to improve student well-being so that we can support schools globally. Next slide, please. To do this, the IB received a generous grant from Jacobs Foundation to do bottoms-up research and innovation. And the idea is that rather than the IB prescribing a research agenda or specific practices that we thought schools should implement, we wanted to learn with and from schools and other organizations globally about what they thought was needed in their local context. In this way, we are collecting ideas globally about practices already being implemented and looking for ones that are promising that we can test more rigorously. We are nearing the end of one such collection of promising practices from the outstanding work Christina Hinton is doing from RSI, and you'll hear from her a little bit later in our panel. And our second effort to collect promising practices is with this HundrED Spotlight, and we are so thrilled to be partnering with them on this Wellbeing in Schools Spotlight, given their extensive expertise in identifying impactful and scalable global innovations. The IB is so pleased that all of you here today are interested in learning more about our work, and we really hope you will submit an innovation to the Spotlight so that we can learn about the important work you are doing to help us inform how we can support schools globally to increase student well-being. Thank you.
Thank you, Jennifer. All right, so next I have the pleasure of introducing Anoushka Jolly. Anoushka is the 15-year-old founder of Kavach App, an adolescent well-being app which aims to holistically address adolescents' everyday issues and problems. And she embarked her change-making journey as a response to being a victim of severe bullying as a child. Her mission began when she was just 9 years old, and she's impacted over 2 million children in 20,000 schools across India. At the age of 13, she became the youngest entrepreneur to receive funding on Shark Tank India for her anti-bullying initiative. Anoushka is also a HundrED Youth Ambassador alumni, and we are very excited to have her here today to share about her perspective on how we can support student well-being. So welcome, Anoushka.
Hi everyone. Thank you so much for this opportunity. I'm really glad to be here. I'm Anoushka. I'm here to talk about how we can support student well-being, and I've been working on it for quite some time. I'm really excited to talk to you all. So can we have the next slide? So according to primary research conducted by my team last year, I asked adolescents in my school and in my community, how are they feeling? What are their everyday feelings? And this is what they said. They feel lonely, constantly stressed, not good enough, and unmotivated. And these words came up more often and more frequently than any other negative word and any positive word. So you can see that how much adolescents are truly suffering and what they're really feeling. Now, the cause of these are actually a bunch of issues. Can we have the next slide? This is mostly correlated to our everyday problems. Things like FOMO, substance abuse, academic stress, bullying, body issues, social media pressures. And these are not mental health issues like depression and anxiety. They are not disorders. Rather, they're the kind of issues that you go through on an everyday basis. And these go unnoticed and are not given as much importance. Can we have the next slide? So right now in schools, there are about 3 main interventions that take place. I would say that these are the most common and most accessible and easy to implement. So they're implemented in a bunch of schools. Firstly, as you can see from this image, is having a counselor for the students to kind of open up and share any problems they're going through. Next slide. Then schools give space for recreational activities and activities that de-stress you, like sports. Next slide. And lastly, a lot of schools do seminars and sessions on these topics, for example, bullying or substance abuse, and they have an expert or a teacher or a counselor speaking to the students and talking about, what to do. All right, next slide. But in these solutions, what I've noticed is that there are some gaps. First of all, students don't open up. They don't feel comfortable in talking to a counselor about their problems because in reality, they only connect with other students. Now, just an everyday example, this happened yesterday. The other day, we were sitting in class and we were talking about sharing feedback on the class that's gone by because we've had our last week of school before our 10th boards. And all of them were revealing that they would actually much rather talk to a student or their friend about any sort of doubt in class or any problem than they would to the teacher. And I started thinking about this and I started internalizing it a little bit. And I realized that it's exactly what I do. I sit next to my friend in my chemistry class. And whenever I have a doubt, I only ask her about it. I realized that it's because I feel so much more comfortable talking to my peers about my problems than a teacher, because they're my age, I feel less judged, and I feel like I can open up. So, first point, students don't open up. Secondly, all these solutions that I've spoken about before are not preventive. They're only there after the damage has been done or after there's been an inciting incident. And also, it's not anonymous. Students, anyway, there's so much mental health stigma. And now asking students to kind of open up and share their problems would be a very difficult and demanding ask. The help is very generic. It's not personalized. A seminar will be talking to a large group of students, all of whom have individual specific problems which are not being catered to. And also there are very, very less counselors available. A lot of schools don't have counselors because of the lack of counselors or the expense. And there's also failure to address everyday issues. So what I spoke about, the bubbles, you could see the bubbles with those everyday issues that adolescents are going through. We often address the bigger mental health issues like depression or anxiety or the disorders when it gets to that stage. But in reality, we should be talking about the everyday issues that actually lead up to these problems. And as I spoke about, they don't connect with teachers, only connect with students. Lastly, and most importantly, I think, all of these solutions are still not addressing the root cause. Why are students suffering from mental health issues? It's only tackling their behavior in the school. It's only tackling their kind of understanding or awareness. It's not building upon that or addressing the root cause. Can we have the next slide? So I realized this and I made a little list of what exactly is needed from a school in their mental health intervention. And it's very simple. It's a few points to keep in mind. First of all, peer-to-peer help is very, very important. You need to have students empowering and enabling other students because they listen to each other. They form a community and they are most influenced by another. So kind of creating a system of peer pressure, but positive peer pressure. Next, the solution needs to be preventive, cater to the problem before it gets to a stage of concern. It needs to be anonymous, something that gives students space to open up. And of course, personalization is very important, where you have like something that caters to each and every student or a group of students facing similar problems. It needs to address everyday issues. And by addressing everyday issues, as in the ones you saw before, you're also addressing the root cause. Lastly, it's most important that you're giving students a safe space to open up. You're giving them a forum or a classroom, something that is making them feel like they can speak up about their issues. Because in honesty, when you're facing these adolescence is a confusing time. It's the most complicated time in someone's life. And when you're facing all these issues, at the end of the day, you do not sometimes have the energy or what it takes to speak up and solve your problem. Sometimes you just need to vent and open up and let it out. And giving a safe space for that to happen can make a huge difference in their mental health. And most of all, in their trust in the school, because they feel like school is a safe place where I can talk about whatever problems I'm having and I won't be judged or ostracized. So yeah, that's what I kind of thought of. And that's all for today. Thank you so much for hearing me out. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Anoushka. Thanks for sharing your thoughts, and it's always inspiring to hear about the work that you're doing. And happy to have you join also for the panel now. So next we're having this panel discussion. In addition to Anoushka, we will be also having experts on well-being research, Dr. Magdalena Balika, who is the Senior Research Manager at the International Baccalaureate organization, whose current focus area of research is well-being in education. And we have Dr. Christina Hinton, who is Research Associate at the Human Flourishing Program at Harvard University and the founder and CEO of Research Schools International. And we have Leonie Boyle, the Executive Assistant and Office Manager at the Wellbeing Research Center at the University of Oxford. And this panel discussion will be moderated by Frederica Warren, the Research Advisor at HundrED. So over to you, Freddie.
Thank you, Jamie. Thank you so much for joining for today's panel on how we can support student wellbeing. I'm sure we're looking forward to hearing insights from our panel of global experts. And so I'd like to start by asking Dr. Christina Hinton, what are some evidence-based practices to support student wellbeing?
Thank you. Well, one that can't be understated is anything to support social relationships. So that is relationships among students, with teachers, with other staff at the school. Relationships are a very powerful predictor of a whole range of well-being outcomes. In fact, a 75-year longitudinal study at Harvard showed it was the #1 predictor of several outcomes. Lots of research has shown it's the #1 predictor of happiness as well, the quality of your social relationships. So anything to support social relationships is an excellent practice and super important. Another I would say that's very well established is physical education. So of course that's physical education in classes, as well as sports and clubs and that sort of thing, but it also means active learning. So getting the kids up and about in the classroom. I think that's an important piece of that as well. So anything where you can get the students moving is very good for them. And then there are others, for example, volunteering. There's an evidence base emerging showing that that's quite good for many aspects of well-being. And also your health, by the way. An interesting study showed that 10 weeks of volunteering can actually lead to better cardiovascular health markers. So it's really amazing the impact it can have. And of course, your physical health influences your psychological well-being too. So it's all interrelated. So that would be another one I would highlight that's quite interesting. Any kind of character programs or interventions are also really good for your well-being. They support a whole range of well-being outcomes, as well as indirectly support through fostering closer social relationships. And so those are a few highlights I would definitely go for.
Thank you so much, Christina, for those insights. Okay, next I'd have a question for Dr. Magdalena Balika. What role do innovators play in addressing these challenges?
That's a very good question, because actually at IB, we really want to support schools to increase students' well-being via evidence-based intervention. Unfortunately, not all the interventions, as some examples we already heard from Christina Hinton, are well established, but not all of the solutions are evidence-based. And this is the role of innovators. We really rely on innovators to come with their fresh minds. We know that innovators are creative, and we also believe that schools and the school community in itself is a innovation space. And our project in the IB was actually based on this idea, on this assumption that there are a lot of sparkle innovation that we can't know, we don't know actually. So in my mind, I think innovators plays a crucial role in contributing to the growth of evidence-based practices because they are much closer to the reality of the school. And I was so pleased to hear Anoushka earlier. So this is a very nice example of an innovator really understanding the context and really understanding the school culture and what is happening there. And the innovative approach actually came up from really being engaged with the reality of a school. So to us, innovations are very important because they can direct us in new areas, new strategies that we have never thought before. I think another interesting practice that I've seen, a lot of innovators are partnering with research centers in order to really implement studies to see the effectiveness of different apps or different interventions that they are doing for the first time. And another perhaps important role that innovators can play is they are the actors that they can adapt innovation to a very specific local context. And I don't see any other strong voice in advocating for policy change in the well-being space. And that's amazing that we have this, risk takers and creative people. Doesn't matter if they are students, teachers, researchers, or member of the school community that are really engaged in doing something new and trying and experimenting. We can actually help them with research afterwards, but without their new ideas and their desire to change, we can't do much. So we are always welcoming innovative approaches because this is the way for us to innovate and learn from a research perspective as well.
Thank you so much, Magdalena. Some really interesting points to raise. Thank you. So Anoushka, it'd be interesting to hear, as an innovator yourself, what has been your approach in supporting student well-being?
I hope you can see me. So for me as an innovator, the biggest thing is for me to look at the issue from the perspective of the target audience that I'm building for. So for me, that target audience is an adolescent. And understanding their perspective was fairly easy because I'm an adolescent, but I had to constantly keep in touch with people who were different than I am. So for example, what is the issue like from the perspective of somebody who is coming from a broken home, or somebody who is facing an addiction to a substance? So understanding all those different perspectives for me is really, really important as an innovator. And yes, as ma'am mentioned, accounting for change in policy, accounting for systemic change, and trying to create something of that sort, because ultimately we are all part of a society and we all work in a system, and somebody making some sort of individual protest or change is definitely a starting point, but real change comes from institutionalization and changing the system. So of course that is coming from individuals protesting, standing up, and creating a community. So firstly, I would say understanding the perspectives of the students and the adolescents is very, very important. And for that, of course, having adolescents in your board or in your being in constant touch with them is very important. Secondly, I would say that keeping in mind that institutionalization, that policy, that systemic kind of factor in it is also really, really important.
Great, thank you so much, Anoushka. We really value, obviously, student voice at HundrED, and it's so exciting to hear more about how you've involved other students in your work. So now, question for all panelists. Are there differences between wellbeing innovations in schools and those for the general public?
Can I answer this one?
Yeah, go ahead.
So I've seen that in schools, a lot of it, of course, school has more structure in terms of like who is reporting to who, all of that definitely exists. And for that to implement a mental health solution in school is a bit more tricky than, exposing it to the general public. And of course, since you're involving children, the entire idea of making it appropriate for them, making sure there's space for them to talk and voice out their problems is also an important factor. When you're building for the general public, you're sort of putting it out there and you are keeping in mind that the person who will be downloading whatever you're building, the app or anything, is somebody who is an 18 plus individual, somebody who is willingly doing so. So there is like a sense of you're volunteering for it. But in schools, of course, it goes from top to down. So it goes from the teachers to the students. So there is this sense of resistance. There's this sense of like, no, I don't want to do it because my teacher is telling me to do it. She's forcing me to do it, just as an example. So of course there is more resistance. It's more difficult to implement it in school, and students don't think that we're cool. They don't want to download the app that we tell them to, or implement the solution that we tell them to, because they're not doing it voluntarily. It's something that we're pushing towards them. So that would be one difference.
Thank you, Anoushka. That's a really interesting insight from your perspective. Leonie, did you want to say something next?
Yeah, thanks, Anoushka. I think I just wanted to add that another reason why schools are or schools differ in an approach we might take to the general public is that a lot of research has found that the habits and the behaviors that we encourage at childhood and adolescence can carry on through into adulthood. So by focusing with schools on child and adolescent wellbeing, we can help develop preventative strategies and perhaps reduce the reliance on wellbeing interventions later on in life. So schools are just a crucial part of society, and I think I'm preaching to the choir. Everyone on this call knows how important schools are, but yeah, we really need to cherish and nurture the behaviors and strategies developed at the start of life.
Thank you, Leonie. Magdalena or Christina, is there anything else you'd like to add to this question?
Yeah, we've learned also that working with students in school, you have a challenge of ethical consideration as well. And Anoushka already mentioned some of those. So how we can actually make that safe space. And also we have all the consent from teachers, students, parents all together in order to engage them in different kind of initiatives. And I think also that implementation is perhaps in a way more controlled for a school than compared to the large public, for instance. If we do have a research in a school, you have more chances, or intervention, you have more chances to follow up and to see the outcomes of your intervention in a more controlled way, perhaps, than a large public type of intervention, which is kind of optimistic, perhaps, and promising, as also Leonie said. So if we don't intervene now when the students are in school, perhaps later in adult life will be much more difficult and more costly as well. So, yeah.
Thank you, Magdalena. Christina, is there anything you'd like to add?
I think this is a really important point about schools providing an opportunity to intervene early, even from a neuroscience perspective. So my background is in neuroscience and education. The brain is more plastic or adaptive the younger that we are. So the earlier you can intervene, the more you're going to be able to support Of course, our brain continues to learn and develop throughout our life, but still it is kind of a golden opportunity for many kinds of learning. So I think that's a really important point to emphasize. And schools, of course, bring children together in a structured way. So it's just, I think it's a really excellent place to intervene.
Great, thank you. And while I have the four of you here, my next question for all of you is, what are we not seeing? So what in the innovation space is not coming up, addressing some of the bigger gaps that you've spotted? Christina, thank you.
Yeah, just to highlight one, there's some promising research on connecting with nature and how good it can be for many aspects of our well-being. But much more research is needed in that area. And I think that's a space where we really should look more, especially given the sustainability issues that we're facing and all of that. I think that's a key piece of our well-being, is kind of living in harmony with our surrounding world. And so I think it'd be great to have more work both in research and in schools and in collaborations between researchers and practitioners in that area.
Great, thank you, Christina. Would anyone else? Magdalena?
Yeah, sure. So I think one point that also Anoushka made and the colleagues before, I think we see a lot of innovations and good strategies to implement. Sometimes they are also back into the research and evidence. But what we really miss sometimes is the implementation of it. Because sometimes great ideas and great solutions can fail just because the implementation process is not really engaging, especially with those that are the target groups, as Anoushka said. So I think I would love to see more implementation lenses into these interventions. And I think implementation science would be something that will inform us why a good idea could be successful in one school and could be not that successful in another context. And something else that I would highlight would be that usually it's easier to implement focused or targeted intervention, a solution for a problem, as Anoushka said, being more reactive to something that has happened, but takes a little bit more time and more effort to build what we call a school ecosystem that is supporting well-being. And to be honest, even in the research, we don't have yet a solution how to build up an entire school ecosystem around where everyone feels safe and well in school, not only students, but also teachers, leaders, the entire community. So I would really like to see more approaches around how to build a school ecosystem and what would be the successful strategies to implement that.
Thank you, Magdalena. Leonie?
Yeah, thank you. Just building on from what Magdalena said, I think this gives up perfectly for at the Wellbeing Research Center. We've partnered with the IB and we'll be publishing later this month, I believe, 4 reports. And a key takeaway from those reports is the importance of teacher well-being in student well-being. And what we found is that there isn't that much research. And the question you pose to the group is what insights do we need? And we really need more insights into teacher well-being interventions, how teacher well-being interacts with child well-being. But yeah, I just wanted to throw that out there as well. Thank you.
If I could just add to that, I completely agree. I think that the kind of feeling and vibe that the teacher is bringing to the classroom can just change the way that the students are feeling themselves and learning. And just as a very simple example, someone has even asked in the chat, how do you create an environment where students can share openly with the teachers? And something that I've seen, a very simple way to do that is to create a space where teachers can open up and share their own personal kind of whatever they want to share. So if, for example, my teacher we're in a class discussion and my teacher is telling me about how much stress she's feeling correcting a lot of papers. And then I'm talking to her about how much stress I'm facing doing the papers. There is a sense of trust established between us. There is a sense of connection, and I will feel much safer to talk about my issues or share, or there's a safe space created because of that, that sharing that happens, that two-way sharing. So teacher well-being is of utmost importance, and we can't talk about student well-being if we don't talk about teacher well-being.
Thank you so much, Anoushka.
I just want to highlight that the International Baccalaureate and the Wellbeing Research Center at Oxford are releasing a report on teacher well-being soon. So that'll be a wonderful resource on that.
Thank you so much for sharing that. I think everyone's looking forward to that report coming out soon. Okay, so I've now got a question for Leonie. Magdalena's already touched upon this, but could you elaborate a little further? Why is it important that innovations addressing well-beings in schools are backed by evidence?
I think, as with all social and health sector decision-making, we want to strive towards science-based research and evidence-based practice. So, for example, you wouldn't really pose this question within a medical context. Of course, we'd want science-based research backing up medical interventions, and I think that applies very clearly again here for wellbeing interventions in schools. I think a key thing to argue is that schools are under-resourced. This is something we all know. This is something that everyone's been sharing in the chats. Thank you to everyone's inputs. And I think looking at evidence-based research and interventions that can help guide resources and help guide the allocation of energy and schools' limited time, and it's a more efficient use of time. That being said, science isn't everything, and Magdalena's said it before, but I'll say it again. Each school is its own individual ecosystem. So just because one study or a collection of studies suggests one practice, don't go into an intervention thinking this will absolutely work for your school. You all know schools are completely different. There are so many different factors at play. We really want schools to be mindful in reading intervention research, even though it's science based, to really think critically about how your own school context might differ from the context of the study, or how your school context might have more pressing needs. As Anoushka said earlier, different adolescents and children face different stresses. So if your school, you find a lot of adolescents are struggling with broken homes or dysfunctional family environments, that might be an angle you want to take and prioritize over perhaps other streams of wellbeing intervention. But yes, I think just again, we'll be sharing reports later on this month, so I would urge you to all read that.
Thank you so much, Leonie. Yes, Christina.
Yes, I think it's incredibly important because you want to make sure that all the energy you're investing is actually having a positive outcome on the students. And the only way really to know that is to test it. Another reason is that you can actually do harm. So for example, we created a kindness intervention that required the students to do a lot of kind of outward expressions of care. And we found that it was effective for girls, increase their kindness, but for boys, it raised their anxiety. So you never really know what kind of impact you're going to have until you study something. So it's really important. And that's just one small example. Like there are many, many others where you try to do something good and you can actually have the opposite impact. So it's really important to study and make sure it is indeed effective. But I also want to echo what others are saying, which is that research isn't enough. So it's also critically important to understand the user, so to speak, on the ground, the teachers and students and staff in the schools. What are their motivations? What are their needs? And make sure that you're working. So I lead an organization called Research Schools International, what we do is we support collaborations between researchers and practitioners. So you can make sure you're working together so you understand the needs, the research is addressing the needs, and as you're designing, you understand what's actually going to work with students on the ground, but you're also making sure it's taking into account what we know from the research. So I think that's really a powerful way to approach it, is to have that kind of collaboration.
Thank you, Christina. So I'd like to end on the question, what are we looking for? And that's for the whole panel, please.
Yeah, maybe I can start. We actually initiated this wonderful project in a very large and respectful partnership with RSI, with Oxford, with Harvard, and our work is supported by the Jacobs Foundation with a lot of generosity. So at the end, what we really want to do is to learn from our schools and from the innovators, and to help us respond to a key question at IB. How we can actually do well-being, understand well-being, not just a kind of added feature to our educational system, but how we can make well-being a core of our educational systems. And when I say about the core of our educational system, I think, what about well-being becoming a design principle for the entire way of thinking of our systems? For instance, from the way that we formulate our educational goals and expectations, how we teach, and the way that we assess students' learning as well. And that's the biggest question that we start this journey on well-being at IB, and hopefully we'll be able at the end of the project to really put some good basis for a construction that is not only for the IB relevant, but it's globally relevant based on what we've learned from the research in general. So the basic question that we want to get some answer is how we can make well-being the core of our educational systems in the world.
Thank you. And what's quite exciting is that really that is the trend, I would say, in the policy world. So for example, the OECD recently commissioned our team at the Flourishing Program to write a piece on a framework for education for flourishing. How can we measure it? How can we think about it? Because many countries in their membership are moving toward that. So Finland, for example, has just declared that flourishing is the ultimate aim of their education system. So I think that we're realizing that we need something beyond just academic achievement, and we really need to have a wider vision. So it's quite exciting, because I do think that there's an inertia moving toward what Magdalena is envisioning. As she mentioned, the IB is working in that space as well, and several other leaders.
So I think that that's some really wonderful ideas what we have in store, and the way that we're moving towards it long term. But I also think that, short term, at least in a lot of developing countries like India, for example, there is a lot of base level intervention required, because that is also not there. So just as an example, in India, there's a state called Rajasthan, and in Rajasthan there is a district called Kota. It's a particular district which is it's kind of the education hub of India, where college students across India go to Kota, and they prepare for engineering entrance exams. And it's the most prestigious, it's one of the most difficult exams in the world. It's the most prestigious exam in India, and you get into a particular college called IIT. And now recently they've had a lot of student suicides, a lot of the tragic incidents that are happening. And their response, the authorities, their response was to install an anti-suicide device on the ceiling, which was the state of their response. And when I read about this, I was a little taken aback that this is the way that they chose to respond to the situation. I realized that when we have all these really, really groundbreaking and amazing discussions on well-being, when we talk about what we want in the future, and we see countries that are actually implementing those wonderful solutions, we also see countries that are so far behind on, and because their entire society and their entire structure is based solely based on, you know, career and making your way through society, especially in India for a lot of people. So even that base level, getting it to as many schools across the world, getting that message, getting counselors, getting the awareness to them. I mean, just recently, I learned that there was a bullying incident in Pune, I think, and the principal of the school did not even know how to solve the problem. And because of that, the student in the school had to quit the school and change schools. So we say that, you know, well-being is moving forward and we're trailblazing, but we need to make sure that nobody is being left behind in this revolution and we're taking everybody along. So
I can just add quickly, I think that's such an important point. And one of the things we've been emphasizing in our work is that flourishing is not about just individual flourishing, it's about individual flourishing within our communities and context. So that means that in our communities, which ultimately means our global community, and context meaning our planetary context, and just recognizing the interdependence of that, that we can't just target a student. And we really have been emphasizing that. Because this is such an important point about equity of this. It needs to be all of us together.
I think also building off of Christina and Anoushka, you're so right in grounding all of us, and we might like to give ourselves a pat on the back and think we're doing so great, well done everyone, but there is still a lot of work to do, as evidenced in the World Happiness Report that came out a couple of weeks ago. Our team were very lucky to be the first chapter to explore child and adolescent well-being within the World Happiness Report, and the key highlights from that report were looking at child and adolescent well-being and how children are suffering, and looking at the disparities across the globe with regards to that. So yes, definitely keep morale up. We can work together in order to achieve something, but the job's not done. We're nowhere near done. Yeah, thank you.
I just want to say a big thank you to all the panelists today. It's been so incredibly interesting, and you've provided such valuable insights from your different backgrounds. And I'll now hand back to Jamie.
Yeah, actually, I wanted to now bring up some questions from the Q&A for the panel. One question that we have is, someone is saying, we are seeing more evidence in the UK that school is the source of children and young people's unhappiness. I wonder what the views of the panel are on this.
Well, I think we've discussed throughout how critical schools as an institution are in shaping the lives of children and adolescents. And as Anoushka said, even I think we all have anecdotal experience of our school experiences being shaped by the teacher, and some teachers we really gravitate towards and felt open with, whereas others were colder and we felt that distance and we perhaps weren't as happy in those lessons. I think, yeah, there's a lot of discussion in the UK at the moment looking at schools being a source of unhappiness, and unhappiness in relation to stress and exam anxiety and high stakes examinations, bullying. These are all aspects of school life we really need to look at. And yeah, I think the perspective that we have at the Wellbeing Research Center is very much recognizing schools as a hub, as a catalyst for these experiences that students are having, and so as a result we need to focus on schools as our way in, if that makes sense. Thanks, Jamie.
Yes, for sure. Thanks for those insights. Anoushka, do you want to go next?
yeah, I also wanted to add that for me personally, what I've seen is that schools is definitely a place where students spend majority of their time, but I still feel that you are shaped mostly by what you see and experience at home with your family. And when we talk about, schools having a responsibility for well-being, we often forget that a school is providing a space, right? They are enabling social interaction, they're enabling opportunity, but they are not ultimately, raising the child. That needs to be done by the parents and the caretakers. So while I completely value the research that's been, showing that schools are responsible for student stress, I also feel like parents are and families are more responsible for the student stress, because you can be in an extremely stressful situation in your life, you can be in a troubled school, you can be in a weird negative environment, but when you come back home and you talk to your parents and you open up and you are given a safe space to share and understand what's wrong, what's right, or that's a little black and white, but understanding where your boundaries lie, you are still able to make that boundary between what you want to do and what you don't want to do. Just as an example, giving a lot of examples today, I don't know where they're coming from, but in my school, there are all kinds of students. There are students who are very, very focused and hands-on and raise their hand in every lesson. There are also students who sit in the back of the class and wait for the lesson to get over and then go out and talk to their friends and maybe get involved in fights and incidents and whatnot. There are all kinds of kids. As a parent, your job is to send your kid to school and enable them in such a way that they are able to go to their class and decide who they want to be influenced by. Do I want to hang out with the kids that make me be the best version of myself and participate in class? Do I want to hang out with the students that are making me participate in illicit activities? And I completely understand that also students they don't have the physiological ability, their prefrontal cortex is not at that stage yet. So they will eventually at some point make the wrong decision and they might go in the wrong thing. But getting yourself out of that situation and being able to recover is also, a lot of it has to do with your parenting. And school, I also believe, resembles real life. The whole point of going to school is, of course, learning. But more importantly, my dad tells me, I tell my dad, I can finish the school syllabus in 3 months sitting at home. Why do you send me to school? And he says, I'm not sending you to school for studying. You can do that. I'm sending you to school because I need you to get the experience and the social skills, which you can't get at home. I want you to be exposed to all kinds of kids and all kinds of environments. And I want you to make the decision of who you want to be influenced by, who you want to hang out with, and what you want to do. And school is providing a space. School has a moral responsibility to ensure there is nothing wrong happening. But eventually, I would say majority of it is definitely coming from the family and the background and the values instilled in the child from day one. That's my opinion.
Thanks, Anoushka. Yeah, definitely there's a role for families and parents to play as well as schools. Maybe Christina, do you have something to comment on?
Yeah, just briefly, I wanted to say that of course, there's different values and ideas about this across countries and cultures, but I would argue that it's a partnership. So families are important, schools are important, communities are important. We're all kind of in partnership in raising children. But I also wanted to flag that we're launching a parenting initiative at the Harvard Human Flourishing Program because of the important role of parents. So it'll be focused on evidence-informed parenting. So also bringing them in as partners in this work, which is exciting.
All right, so thank you so much to all the panelists. That's all the time we have today for the panel discussion. I'm sure that everyone has really enjoyed this discussion. Now I am going to show a video from the Director General of the International Baccalaureate Organization, Olli-Pekka Heinonen.
Best participants of this workshop, the famous author Leo Tolstoy studied his novel Anna Karenina in 1877 with the words, "All happy families are alike. Each unhappy family is unhappy in its own way." And I think there's a lot of wisdom in those words also when we were discussing the question of student and teacher well-being. There is, first of all, there is both an individual and a community aspect of well-being. And then there is the importance of the context of each unhappy or situation with a decreased well-being. And with happy families, there's a common set of attributes which led to happiness, while there's a variety of attributes that can cause an unhappy family. And the same goes also with well-being. Statistics show us that 10 to 20% of students experience clinical level health difficulties. And we are all well aware of the declining level of well-being students are reporting, a trend that started already before the COVID-19 period. And this is a challenge for education systems and schools that they are facing for the first time. So we don't have any ready-made answers to take off the shelf and use. But this is a learning situation for all of us. And therefore, I'm so happy to see so many of you joining this journey of learning to find better solutions for the best of our students. The IB is very connected and committed to this challenge. We want to find the good solutions. We know that this is not a top-down exercise, but a co-creation of innovations and solutions. And therefore also for us to have the possibility to use the HundrED spotlight to tackle this major question for the best of the future of young generation is so important. We are thankful for that partnership, and I do believe that we will find that set of attributes that can help us nurture well-being communities, know the skills and the knowledge that increase well-being, and also the attitudes that are so important, that what students and teachers themselves can do to increase their well-being. Thank you very much for being together on this journey. Best participants of this.
All right, so that brings us to the end of the webinar. Thank you all for attending today. As mentioned at the beginning and throughout, this webinar has been part of the HundrED Spotlight, Wellbeing in Schools. What we are looking for is innovators that are working on something to improve well-being in schools. So if you are someone that is working on doing that, then please apply to our Spotlight. You can find the link in the chat or scan the QR code here, and the deadline for that is May 1st. So that's all that we have for you today. Thank you so much for joining. Thank you to the panelists for sharing your insights, and thank you for everyone for taking the time to discuss this important topic with us today. All right. Bye.